So we're going to devote the next hour to the discussion on Al-Andalus. Now, again, in order to really talk about the history of Muslims in Spain or Islam in the Iberian Peninsula, you have to contextualize the whole discourse again, just like I did with regard to Africa, so that we can understand what was going on at that time. As I said in the previous presentation, Islam began to expand into Egypt 40 years after the death of the Prophet. And of course, Muslims gradually exercised hegemony over North Africa. And with the establishment of Muslim naval presence in the Mediterranean, the Umayyad dynasty became the dominant force in the Mediterranean. Now, the Umayyad would lose power. There would be a coup against them by the Abbasid, just like the Shah of Iran was kicked out of power by a movement led, in retrospect, we say Khomeini, but there were other forces in Iran that led to that. The same thing happened. A man by the name of Abu Muslim became the ringleader or the chief propagandist of the Shiite forces that were opposed to the Umayyad. And gradually, of course, his movement, or the movement with which he was identified, became a very powerful subversive force. And in the end, they were able to overthrow the Umayyad dynasty. And of course, the Umayyad are known in Islamic history for reversing a precedent that the Prophet established. The Prophet did not call himself a king, because the Arabs had some people who were kings in Yemen and in the northern part of Arabia bordering Syria. You have the Himyarites and the Ghazanid Arabs. One was linked to the Persians, the other one was linked to the Romans. But basically, the Arabs had their sheikhs, who was primus inter pares, first among equals. Now, that was the tribal arrangement. As a result of the Umayyad taking over the Islamic movement, monarchy was introduced into Islam. So they established a line of kings. They carried the title Caliph, but they were no longer elected. It was now based on succession, something that went against the grain of early Islam, because none of the caliphs was succeeded by his kid. Abu Bakr was not succeeded by his son. Omar was not succeeded by his son. Usman was not succeeded by his son. It was through election among the Sahabas. Now, the Umayyad established a dynasty based on succession within the royal family, because they created a royal family, which was very un-Islamic. Now, this is the background for the Muslim coming to Spain, because the Muslims had already conquered North Africa, and the Umayyad were ruling this huge empire, the Umayyad family. Now, because they dominated the region, when their power fell, they lost out throughout the empire. Now, the Muslims had already conquered Spain during the Umayyad dynasty. But after the Umayyad were overthrown, they were ruthlessly killed as a family, because they were in a banquet when all of them were massacred. So, there was a survivor in the family who would find his way into North Africa and then eventually come to Spain. And of course, he will be known in the history books as Abdurrahman, who will be Abdurrahman I, who came in and resurrected the Umayyad dynasty. Now, he was able to establish what one will call today a government in exile, but a real government in exile. Of course, I'm sure he entertained dreams that eventually he would go and take over the dynasty from the Abbasid. This was not going to happen. So he found himself in Spain, which was, from the point of view of the medieval Arabs, very much far. It's like the New Englanders. I mean, like if you live in Boston or New York at the beginning of the Republic, when they tell you about Tennessee, that's far away, or or Georgia, that was really way off there. In the early American Republic, they live in Georgia or out there, you have to be in New York or in Boston really to be in the center of things. The same thing with the Arabs at that time. That were the far edges of the empire. It was nice to be in Damas or in Baghdad, or Khorasan, or some of those places which were the center, the heartland of the early civilization. Now, these Umayyads who survived in Spain, building on what they had done earlier, because it was the Umayyad navy that was able to maintain Umayyad hegemony in the Mediterranean. So when this Abdurrahman came into that region and created what was a government in exile for the Umayyad, who had lost power in the heartland of Islam, you now have a new beginning.